You are listening to We Are the Compassionate Revolution. I'm your podcast host, therapist, author, boundaries guide, Molly Moon. If you are a compassionate person and you want to know your worth, set better boundaries, live from your truth, and operate in your fullness, then I am so glad you've joined us. You ready? Let's get started. Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the show. We're going to get right into a listener question today, and I have some thoughts, things coming up in my heart that I want to share in response. And if you or anyone you love is in the process of healing from childhood trauma, I think that you will find this episode very helpful.
Hiya, Molly Davis Moon. My name's Karon. I'm calling from Australia. For the last 3 years, I've been doing childhood trauma on, obviously, my childhood. And I've discovered a few things, whereas the trauma, I'm not sure it's trauma. The abuse between me and my father became transactional. I'm not sure how to figure that out. I'm really not. But I'm no Christian. I haven't been Christian since I was 11 years old. I'm currently a Wiccan, but I follow all sorts of esoteric stuff. It's so good not just be labelled to one thing. I'm trying to figure out why I can't figure it out, why my father's obvious abuse wasn't abuse. It was transactional.
A powerful, difficult, amazing question. Thank you so much, Karon, for calling in. And I want to say to you and to everybody listening who has experienced childhood trauma that childhood trauma work takes guts, as you know. There are 8,552 reasons we can come up with to avoid going in and doing childhood trauma work. And many people spend their entire lives following, agreeing with those reasons and never going back and doing it. Because it's really hard to go back to the trauma memories and heal them when going back to those memories brings up all of the old feelings, all of the old beliefs, all of the old everything. It's so much easier to button up the trauma, shove it away on the farthest possible shelf in the mind, and go about one's life doing what one does and feel like, yay, I'm healed, this is fine, everything's fine, I don't need to do this trauma work. And what we don't understand, though, is the perception is we've buttoned up the childhood trauma and it's not affecting everything, when in actuality, childhood trauma tends to affect almost everything. Because when the childhood trauma is happening, we're in a very impressionable state. The child, and that includes adolescence, the childhood brain is looking up and out at the world, particularly the people closest, particularly the caregivers, the parents, the closest members that are supposed to, ideally, keep us safe and show us what love looks like. And the childhood brain then is wired to take that in and understand that treatment as normal, expected, and right. So when the child looks up at the world and says, essentially, we're not saying this literally, but this is what the brain is thinking. Who am I and what is my place in this world? And the way that the grown-ups treat us is what we then believe. So a safe caregiver that is going to help create healthy attachment is going to help install into that little child's mind, oh, I am a somebody. I am loved. It is okay to be me. In fact, it is wonderful to be me. And things like self-worth are just a given. Of course I'm worthy, because I'm me. but not in a selfish, narcissistic way, because a child raised in an environment of love also understands that everyone else is worthy too. We're all worthy, of course. Basic respect is a given. It's shocking if basic respect is not given when you're talking to somebody who grew up in a healthy, loving, secure, attached family system, or with caregivers who showed and modeled love, psychological safety, emotional safety, physical safety. However, for those who grow up in a setting where childhood trauma is the norm, we don't call it childhood trauma when we're growing up, right? You just call it normal. It's just how it is. Without even realizing it, that developing brain says, oh, this is who I am. This defines what I can expect. This defines my worth, and this defines my purpose. And that goes on to impact just about everything going forward. And the trickiest thing is this actually happens at a tectonic plate level in the psyche. So there's not actually a conscious awareness most of the time that the brain has even taken this in and it's now in the bedrock of how the personality is understood. It just happens and everything's built on top of that. So, for example, when somebody then avoids going back and doing childhood trauma work or doesn't realize that it's important, that happens a lot, or doesn't have the means to know where to even start, so just keeps putting it off, which is fair, those beliefs that got installed run the show, but in a way that's not even really seen or understood. Now, if you had a very, very healthy, amazing, wonderful childhood, and then when you were 29, a really creepy belief got in there that said, you don't have any worth. You're not worthy of being treated with basic respect. It would be noticeable by the psyche. The psyche would be like, hey, whoa, for 29 years, I've always operated as if I have worth and if basic respect is a given, is my birthright. And now suddenly there's this belief in there that says opposite. That's weird. I better do something about that. That would make sense because it's some odd thing that somehow got into the system and it's very noticeable. But the thing is with childhood trauma, the brain develops with these false beliefs, with these toxic beliefs about self and one's place in the world installed down into the bedrock. And then we go about adult life not even realizing those things are there. It doesn't feel strange to have, for example, self-loathing or self-condemnation, low self-worth, low self-confidence. It doesn't feel strange to have those beliefs down there in the bedrock because they've always been there. They feel normal. We don't even notice what they're impacting and how they're impacting us because it's just how it's always been. So going in to do childhood trauma work is a very, very brave thing. It takes a lot of guts because there's a bit of faith involved. Like, I'm pretty sure this is impacting things. It is not exciting to go back in and work on this stuff. However, I'm going to do it because I think this is impacting more than I know. And number two, I am worthy of healing. That right there is such a powerful act of rebellion. If our childhood trauma told us we're not really worthy of being treated with basic respect, then it takes a lot of guts to go in and say, yeah, I think I'm actually going to tend to these wounds because I think I might be worthy of basic respect. And it is tending to wounds is an act of basic respect for oneself. So courage, the fact that you have a lot of courage, Caron and anyone else out there doing childhood trauma work right now, courage is given. You have a lot of courage. You have a lot of guts. You are very, very brave. So many people avoid this and you're not avoiding it. And I want to cheer you on from my own little corner of the world because this is how we change the world, actually. There are so many of us who have so many skills and talents and giftings and incredible qualities. But as I often say, there's so many things that are keeping us down, holding us back, blocking us from ever coming into the true fullness of our essence and what we're here to do. And childhood trauma is one of those things. And I feel excited. I feel proud to be on a team with you and with everybody else doing this kind of work. I want to shift now and start talking about how our beautiful qualities get co-opted by what I call toxic traps. And I actually drew this trap. I remember when I was cartooning it. You can find this inside of the new version of the Boundaries Breakthrough mini course. That's at boundary.com/breakthrough. Take the quiz in there and you'll see the trap. When I was drawing the trap, I'm like, yup, this. Because there are these traps that catch us. And you don't have to have childhood trauma to get caught up in these traps. Our world is missing its boundaries. Everybody who's compassionate, living in dominant culture, and that certainly includes Australia, and everywhere else dominant culture is in charge. We are all flying blind, so to speak. We are all just doing the best we can, trying to figure out where the boundary lines are. And it's very, very easy to get sucked into one of these traps and have it drain our energy. However, when there is also childhood trauma involved and we have these beliefs installed into us that are so opposite the truth of who we really are, it is really easy to see our beautiful, amazing qualities get co-opted and used against us. And I want to talk right now about one of the qualities that so many compassionate people share, and that is a high responsibility drive. And Caron, I am guessing you have this as well because of the way that you explained a few things in there. It caught my attention right away. A high responsibility drive is an amazing thing. A high responsibility drive is found in people who are slow to take on the label of victim, and they are quick to take on the attitude and the energy of, I can do this, I can handle it, I take ownership for what is within my jurisdiction. High responsibility drive, when it is accompanied by the boundaries of responsibility, the boundaries of power and responsibility, is incredible. A high responsibility drive can do so many good things, not just for our own selves, but for everybody around us, people, places, and things. However, because we're missing our boundaries, our beautiful qualities get co-opted, and this is really apparent when somebody has a high responsibility drive and is subjected to childhood trauma where the adults or caregivers in one's life negated their own responsibilities. So it makes sense then that the child or adolescent in that environment is going to see responsibilities laying on the floor, responsibilities that actually belong to the adult, the one with the power. It makes sense then that the child or adolescent who has a high natural responsibility drive is going to pick those responsibilities up off the floor and put them onto your own back. Because that's what we humans do who have high responsibility drives. We're quick to go ahead and pick stuff up and run with it. And what happens in many abusive situations in childhood is that the adult is responsible for the emotional safety, for the psychological safety, for the relational safety, for the sexual safety, for the physical safety of the child. But when the adult shirks those responsibilities, how is the child to know that those responsibilities are being shirked when that is the environment that the child has always grown up in? If we grow up in an environment where we are not safe, how do we even know that safety is supposed to be the norm? The adult is modeling for us something very different, and the child's brain is very imprintable, very impressionable. The child's brain is open and accepting of what is happening. This is how the world works. This is who I am. This is my place in it. So the adult, the person who is supposed to be carrying the responsibility for safety is not carrying it, then the child with a high responsibility drive naturally in them goes, oh, it is my responsibility to tend to my safety. And the child then takes that on. In that process, then if you think about blame, healthy blame, I'm not talking about unhealthy blame. there is a healthy taking of responsibility for what one is responsible for, right? And so we could say that, for example, if I am responsible to fill the car up with gas so that we can go to the grocery store, but I did not fill up the car with gas and now we can't go to the grocery store, then it is appropriate, not in a mean way, just in a basic facts way, it is appropriate that the blame for why the car can't get to the grocery store is on me. I am to blame for that problem. Well, in that same way, I'm using just a silly little example here, but in a much bigger way, the adult caregiver or parent is responsible for all of the levels of safety for the child. So the blame, therefore, for not providing that safety goes onto the parent. By the way, the parent is not responsible for providing safety in ways that the parent can't. There are things that happen to, in our world. We humans are little and we're kind of wimpy in a lot of ways. For as strong as we are, we're also super, super wimpy. Tornadoes, earthquakes, things that are happening, big sweeping movements in culture, war, events outside of our control. A parent's not responsible for that. You can't be responsible for something you have no power over. However, the parent is responsible for things that they do have jurisdiction over. And in this case, the parent is responsible for controlling their impulses. The parent is responsible for treating you with respect. And it is not treating a child or teenager with respect to assume that they should provide sexual favors of any kind. That is actually assault. That is actually rape. That is actually sexual violence. And tying it into a reward and punishment strategy for behavioral control is total bullshit. I want to talk a bit about what we have to do when we survive. My friend Ingrid Clayton wrote a book called Fawning that talks about this a bit. Some of the ways that the system gets co-opted when one has to survive. When you were a child, and this goes for anybody in a situation similar to this, when you were a child, your number one job was to somehow survive, ideally so that later you could thrive. But in the moment, you just got to survive. And in survival, we got to work with what we got. So it is very, very common for children and teenagers who grow up in an environment that is not psychologically safe, is not emotionally safe, is not physically safe, or is not sexually safe, or is not spiritually safe, all the different ways that one can be abused. It is very, very common for that child to then develop coping strategies that will help them be able to get what they want, get what they need, and stay safe as much as they can. So what the human ends up doing in order to cope in a survival situation isn't what a human would do if only there was safety, but there isn't safety, so now we got to survive. So we got to work with what we got. That's what humans do in a safety survival situation. So I want to bring that all the way back into the transactional deal that was made with you as a teenager, and we'll use that as an example. And if we were to just look at that example devoid of any power and responsibility, then maybe there's a little bit of responsibility there. However, this situation happened within a context, and that context is so, so, so important. The toxic trap that catches so many of us operates through a warped sense of logic. And that warped sense of logic is you're responsible for anything around you, anything pertaining to you, anything you participated in. You bear the responsibility for all of it. And that toxic trap is even telling you, see, this really isn't trauma. This really isn't childhood trauma because you agreed to it. You participated in it. Therefore, you're responsible. It's not abuse, it's transactional. But I would like to say, actually, no, it's not either or. It's not abuse or it's transactional. Abuse can be transactional. In fact, abuse often is transactional. Think about your typical example of physical abuse in a relationship. The one partner says something that makes the other person upset, and the other person punches them. We'll use This, as we all know, physical violence can happen in a variety of situations, but we'll use sort of the quintessential model. The woman says, hey, I need more money. I don't have enough money for groceries. And then the abuser says, how dare you say that? Do you not think I provide enough for you? And what are you doing with your money? And then gets physical. When we're stuck in a warped, toxic trap that makes us think we're responsible for everything, then the woman in that situation is actually going to think that she caused it because she did say something that she knew would rock the boat. She did ask for more money and she knew that was a hot topic. So it's actually her fault that she caused the physical violence. And in fact, oftentimes the person who is abusive will say, it's your fault. You caused the violence. You shouldn't have said it that way. You should have had a different attitude when you said it. You shouldn't have asked for it. You should have spent your money better. So again, you can see that responsibility trap at work. But we have to look at the context of the situation and actually know she is not responsible. She's not supposed to ever have to be responsible for helping another person manage their mood so that they don't commit physical violence. She's not even supposed to have to deal with that situation in the first place. We got to take 10 steps back. He is responsible for controlling his impulses. He is responsible for treating her with basic respect at all times, no matter how he feels. So the problem shouldn't even be there. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but let's go back to your situation. You, as a teenager, should have never been in a situation where an adult caregiver in your life told you that if you do a typical teenage activity where you drink, you sneak alcohol, whatever, that if you do that, you then owe them sexual favors. That adult should have never put you in that situation in the first place. That should have never been a norm. That should have never happened. And that adult is 100% responsible for putting you in that situation. We got to pull 10 steps back and take a look at the context. There are power dynamics in play. Your physical safety, your sexual safety, your emotional and psychological safety, your relational safety. That adult caregiver was responsible for ensuring that you were as safe as they could help you be safe to whatever levels they had power to do so. So that choice should have never been given to you to have to agree to. And the fact that you had to survive and work with what you got, the fact that that just was how it worked in that relationship, that instead of thinking of yourself as responsible, it can be a lot more helpful to think of yourself as a survivor. I did what I had to do in the ways that made sense to me at that time, because my view of normal was warped by the caregiver, the adult, the parent in my life who was abusive towards me, who took advantage of their position of power, took advantage of my vulnerability, and used it for their own pleasure. That is the exact opposite of what a parent is supposed to do. A parent or caregiver is there to lift up the young one and to help set them out into the world as healthy as they can be. Not take that young one, take advantage of their vulnerability and use it for the parent or caregiver's own ends. That was messed up. And allowing you to think that you are partially responsible for it, making it seem like it's a transactional deal, that was their way of evading the responsibility that they were supposed to take. As we discover our true boundaries, then the boundary lines of power and responsibility become very, very clear. If it's possible for you and anyone listening, I have a class. We call it Boundaries 101. It's actually a radically different way of looking at boundaries. But actually within that class, there is a training specifically on power and responsibility that can help quite a bit. It's called the Compassionate Hearts Formula for Sustainable Giving, but it also talks about these things as well, as does the Boundaries Blueprint. And I would love you to take that if you feel so inclined, because I think it would give you a lot of, even if you don't ever work with me in any way further in the future, I think it would give you a lot of insight, a lot of clarity, and a lot of self-compassion. Because what happened to you was not your fault, and that as you became an adolescent, you learned how to work with it to help you survive. That is also further evidence of how messed up it was, that you had to be put in that situation at all. Childhood trauma essentially is a gross and terrible boundaries violation. There are many parents who engage in boundaries violations and not knowing what they do. They don't have the boundaries either. So there are many childhood trauma incidences that happen with people who are doing the best that they could. But in your case, what you're talking about, there are also, unfortunately, many childhood trauma incidences that are happening with somebody actively taking advantage of the vulnerability of the child, knowing at a deep level, somewhere down in there, knowing that is not okay and doing it anyways. And if you think about this on an energetic level, it is so important, energetically speaking, to stop agreeing with the fact that we are responsible as a child or adolescent for adult caregivers or parents' behaviors. It is so important to take that energy and send it back to them. That is theirs to deal with. Those are their consequences to deal with. If you think about it from a karmic perspective, for example, send that karma back to them. It's not supposed to be yours. If you think about it, Jesus talked about reaping and sowing. Send those seeds back to them. What that person did, those are their seeds to have to experience the harvest from, not yours. And from a neuroscience perspective, from a relational science perspective, the relational rules were broken. The rules for healthy attachment, emotional and psychological safety were broken, and therefore the consequences of that, as much as is humanly possible, should go back to that parent or caregiver. And that's one of the hardest things I think about childhood trauma, is there's not going to necessarily be justice in this lifetime. However, one of the ways that we can at least experience more justice in our own bodies is by returning the blame to the person to whom the blame belongs, and not carrying it invisibly, not carrying it emotionally, psychologically, or spiritually inside of ourselves. That's not your blame to carry. You survived. You did the very best you could with what you had, with what you knew at the time. You did the very best you could. Return the blame back to where it goes. It's not your blame. I want to thank Caron for the amazing question, and I want to remind all of the rest of you that you are welcome to send a question in. Anything that has to do with being a compassionate person in this world, growing, healing, changing. You can find the spot to leave your question at boundary.com/podcast. Super easy to do. You've got 90 seconds, so it's actually a long time if you think about it. So think about how to make your question as concisely as possible, but also give me enough information with what's going on that I can feel into it. And I will be happy to answer from my heart and answer as many people as I have time to answer. And if you are interested in getting a radically different way of understanding boundaries, Boundaries 101 is open. It's back. It was such a popular class when we had it, and so we decided to go ahead and open it back up again, and that's found at boundary.com/101. You can poke around on my website, boundary.com, and find all sorts of other resources as well. I hope you all, I know this is a bit of a heavy topic, but yet it's such a brave topic to bring up, and I know so many people dealing with childhood trauma who also have a high responsibility drive blame themselves. And so I'm really, really thankful, Caron, for you bringing this question forward. It's something that's really healing to understand. High responsibility drive people are quick to take on blame, but there's a whole bunch of blame that doesn't belong on us. And how amazing it feels to have our energy freed up. It takes a lot of strength to carry all that blame, and how beautiful it is when we remove it, send it back to where it belongs, and get to experience what it feels like to be who we are without all of those burdens. It's amazing, and you deserve it. I'm glad you're here. My compassionate friend, I am so glad you're with us. We are the compassionate revolution. We are the change the world needs, and we're becoming it. If you loved this episode, please share it with a friend or give this podcast a 5-star review. I'd appreciate it so much. And if you'd like to get practical and work with me more closely on boundaries, you can come visit me at boundaried.com. That's boundaried.com for amazing resources. Because this is how we do it. One action at a time. We are moving into our power. And I'm so proud to be in this movement with you.